All right, guys, welcome back to the Fearless Sports Performance Podcast. And today we have a special guest, Tanner Pruett. He is a pitching coach at MASH Baseball in Savage, Minnesota. So, Tanner, why don't you give us a little background on yourself? Tell us about how you got to MASH, baseball development, just start from the beginning. We'll go from there.
Yeah, for sure. So originally from a small town in California, Newman, in the valley, middle of nowhere. So didn't have a lot of resources like growing up when it came to training or just coaching access. It was just kind of, you know, teachers or guys that maybe played a little bit of college baseball or college sports coming back. But other than that, it was pretty much my dad and I kind of troubleshooting along the way. Get to high school, good career, but due to lack of resources and lack of training, it was like, I was 135 pounds, throwing 78 miles an hour. I was left-handed, so that helped me. But ended up going to Modesto Junior College out in California for a year, and then transferred to Crown College, D3 out here in Minnesota. And a lot of it was just me trying to figure things out on my own. When I got to Crown, there was no pitching coach, there was no strength coach. So it was a lot of piecing things together, problem solving. Probably did a lot more harm than good, but I would say it helped me just learn because the more wrong answers you find, the closer you get to the right one. Um, After that, I trained for a year. I was actually a remote client under Dean Jackson for about 8 to 9 months. Got an invite to the Evansville Otters spring training camp in this, what was that, 2019. I got one spring training inning, no runs, no hits, and then got cut the next day. So after that, I went full time into player development, and the reason behind for going right into coaching was that I kind of wanted to be the resource that I didn't have for whoever needed it. I just feel like that there are too many kids that have a lot of talent. They just don't know how to develop it or how to be seen, or even that they need a weight room. Like me, I didn't know that it was needed for baseball. So just being able to be that mentor, be that guidance, be that resource for whoever needed it was important to me. Um, when I got into player development, I did the facility thing. Ended up as a pitching coach at St. Cloud State for a year, and just kind of bounced around after that in the private sector. And now I am at, like you said, MASH Baseball out here in Minnesota. And we're growing at a fast rate. We've got a new, I think it's like 65,000 square foot facility. We're growing fast, and they do a really good job with development. So I'm really excited to see where that takes off. Haven't been there for a full year yet, but so far so good.
That's awesome. So, in this player development, you've been in it for a while. Have you seen like a different transition from when you started to, like where we're at now in terms of, when I was playing high school, the big thing was like tons of plyo balls. Everyone was doing kind of the same routines where it would be reverse throw, pivot pick, roll and rocker, things like that. And that was considered to be like different. You were kind of weird doing that. And now we've sort of transitioned into this part of baseball development where that's almost like a part of the past for some people.
Yeah.
So, where do you kind of see the way that things have gone? What have you liked about player development? What kind of things have, you implemented that you think, should be being implemented like more going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I guess when I look back as a player in high school, like I didn't know what a plyo ball or weighted baseball was, honestly, until my junior year of college. And that would have been the 16-17 school year. Like I didn't know what any of that was. And so for me, it was just like, don't know anything about it, don't really need it. I'm already late in my career anyway. But as I got into coaching, like I said, I was under Dean Jackson, where he really like introduced like this is how you use them properly. This is how you keep yourself from getting hurt. So then I was exposed to it. I'm like, oh, okay, this is how it could be. But like when I started coaching, a lot of kids like they didn't know what they were either. Um, like Rapsodo was just hitting the scene as far
Yeah.
as like pitch data goes. So I would say like it's grown a lot, but I think it went overboard on probably went overboard on plyos, data,
Yeah.
and metrics. Not that those things can't help, but I think we just did too much of it too fast. And then everybody had to do it. Everybody was getting Rapsodo. Everybody was getting plyo balls, running the same routines. Everybody was doing pull downs and velo days once or twice a week. Some
Yeah.
people were ripping plyos 5 days a week because they didn't know that, like, hey, you actually need a recovery day every once
Mhm.
in a while. So I think it was just everybody just jumped in and said, oh, this is what's on social media. We're going to do this. And I think it ended up doing a lot more damage than anything. Um, and I just think, like, if a kid doesn't want to throw plyos, he doesn't have to. There's so many different ways to get better. Like, you
Yeah.
don't have to use it. It's a tool, right? Can it be good to have some overload, underload? 100%. But from what I've seen, you really only need a 10% increase or decrease to really, like, get a true effect. So do we need to be throwing a 2 pound plyo? Probably not. Some guys like it. Sure, go for it. But just know that that's not going to make or break anything for you. I just think that plyos ended up being overhyped, like I said. But then if we look at the data side, I think we've also have just relied too much on it. Like,
Yeah.
the eye test back in the day showed a lot. The data can confirm it, but also if we're just relying on data and trying to fit perfect data points, it's no different than trying to fit quote unquote perfect mechanics on a guy that maybe can't move that way. And so, like, an example is there was a pro guy that trained at MASH over the winter, and he has a straight over the top slot, like extremely high. He's a lefty, runs it up to mid 90s, but his changeup on a TrackMan was pretty dead zone. Like, it was considered flat. But every hitter he faced was like, I can't hit that thing. That thing is dropping off the table so hard. All these affiliated organizations were like, you got to fix that changeup. And he's like, what's wrong with it? He goes, oh, it's too flat. It's, on the
Yeah.
TrackMan plot, it doesn't look good. And he's like, but nobody's hit it.
Yeah.
And teams were just like, nope, it's got to change. And every hitter is like, don't change it. Like, that is your best pitch. Nobody can touch it.
Yeah.
So I think we just see too much of that as well, like trying to fit perfect molds when you don't need to.
Mhm. I worked, for the last 3 years, and I recently just left. I was working at a high school, and I worked under the head coach, who was a 17-year vet in the MLB, and his whole thing, was very on the other end of the spectrum, like eyes only. If the pitch works, the pitch works. And obviously, if you play 17 years in the big leagues, like, a thing or two. You're no dummy to that. So there's a lot of validity to that. And I think that, like, it's like you said, it's useful information to be able to confirm that a pitch is good. Like, we've used it in the past for guys who are like, I get 0-2, 1-2, can't punch a guy out. It's like, all right, let's see why. Maybe your fastball just doesn't do what you think it does. But it is definitely one of those things where it's like, if that thing looks like it spins like crap, but no one's touching it, it's like, what's the point? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, like, you want the hitter to swing. You want him to set up middle, because that was one thing also in high school that I would tell guys is I would take mound visits, and I'd be like, hey, look, I know you're not trying to throw balls, but you're also not trying to throw a strike. You're trying to dance around way too much. And I think that the
Mhm.
analytical side has brought us to that too. Get something that comes back over the corner, trying to nibble up and down in the zone too much. Um, that's a that's a crazy thing too. And it's like you said, like, folding everybody into like one box or several boxes of, like, perfect mechanics. Like, can you kind of expand on that and talk a little bit more about the way you would approach, trying to work with somebody and their movement patterns on the mound, or even just regular throwing, versus like, we got to get our arm up this way, that way, kind of going off your approach and what you're doing at MASH right now.
Yeah. So, like, when I'm working with a guy, like, my first question is always, what are you trying to do? And that gives me a lot of insight of what their intentions are, literally what they're trying to do. And if their intentions aren't matching up with the task at hand, then maybe we need a mind shift. And sometimes, like, just simply saying, like, hey, forget about your arm. Just try to throw this thing through the glove. set up middle, try and throw it through the glove. And more often than not, like, is there a major change? Maybe not, but you're switching their intentions to like the task at hand. And if you go through that and then you can't, like, okay, there's something literally in the way, let's break out the camera and let's try and figure out, like, hey, what do you see? What do you feel? What's going on? And if they usually athletes have a good idea of, like, hey, this just doesn't feel right. Okay, cool. Let's explore it a little bit, because I don't have the right answer. I don't think really many coaches have the exact answer at the exact moment the question is asked. I think if you look at it through an exploratory lens, like, hey, let's explore the lower half here. Let's see what direction we can go, or whatever the mechanical thing is. Let's just say lower half. Um, like, let's try some different types of throws. Let's try going from flat ground to a slope, maybe, like, still a slope but flatter, or maybe try something steeper. Like, let's see if we can feel something where it's like, oh, that was better. I got the result I was looking for. And so then we're also looking at it through functionality. What's going to get the task done? It's like, okay, let's figure out why you can't do that. Is it a physiological thing? Is it a strength thing? Like, what is the constraint at play that's keeping you from doing it? And then we attack it from that point. I think trying to force mechanics is the wrong way to go about it in every way possible. And I think a big example of that was the vertical shin craze. I think of, like, was that 2019, 2020?
Yeah, I think it was probably somewhere within that. I would say probably 2019 when it was like
Yeah.
vertical shin.
Yeah, everybody's like, you need to have a vertical shin so you can get a good load. And it's like, well, what if somebody doesn't have the ability to do that? Like, what if they just don't? What if they're an IR driven guy in their lower half and they
Hmm.
can't get that vertical shin, yet you're trying to force that?
Yeah,
Shout out to Rob Blanc for teaching me all of that about the lower
yeah,
half. But like, um, but like, if you're trying to force something that they literally can't do, you're just wasting your time. And more often than not, if an athlete can't do something and a coach is trying to force it, then they
hmm
just end up blaming the athlete anyway. Like, oh, you're not trying hard enough. You're not taking it seriously. Like, oh, maybe you weren't meant to pitch. And there are guys that, yeah, maybe they weren't meant to pitch. But at the same time, like, the coaches are then offloading all the blame to the athlete. It's like, oh, it's your fault. You're broken. Like,
yeah.
not my problem.
I think that there's also a big thing that like pitchers kill for a good amount of femoral internal rotation, and then trying to force a different way to get there is harmful for them too, because it's like if you don't have internal rotation, you got to find it, or you're not gonna
Yeah.
you're not gonna get the result you want.
Right.
So
You have to learn how to compensate, and you
yeah.
can't learn how to compensate if you're being forced to do something.
Hmm. That's a really interesting way of going about, like, trying to force guys into these boxes, because I think for a long time, and I would say it probably started in like maybe even 2011, 2010. um there was the whole like connection ball phenomenon that went on, trying to get guys into a certain upper half, like fit, like the elbow needs to be at shoulder level or below, the arm needs to be at 90 degrees or slightly inside the glove side, like it was all these like playing algebra with guys on the mound almost.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's like it shifted all the way to the lower half. Like it seems like nobody even cares about the upper half that much
Mm-hmm.
anymore. But that's just kind of like a mechanical thing. And I mean, it makes sense. We spend a lot of time on that. And I think for the majority of guys, like especially if you're working with a high school population, those guys just need to eat and lift. Like,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, at some of my jobs where most of my clientele were high school and even middle school kids, and they're like, "Oh, what, do you have any tips for increasing velocity?" And it's like, eat. Go sign up for the weight room, and you need to be in there at least twice a week. And they're like, "Well, what about pitching?" I said, "Do that first, because if you don't have the strength to throw hard, you're not going to throw hard no matter what we do in here. So, like, go in there, build your capacity so then your body can handle it. Because your body can't handle it, and all of a sudden you have a huge velocity jump, then you end up hurt
yeah.
because you don't have the engine for it." So Yeah, it brings up another random topic, and I'm curious to get your thoughts, but how many like potential professional pitchers do you think coaches have ruined because they got rid of the uniqueness of an athlete to fit their mold? I think it happens a lot because like if you look at MLB pitchers, they're all unique in their own way.
Yeah.
And then you get these youth kids and it's like, we're gonna get rid of your funky arm slot because I don't like it, even though you're getting
Yeah.
outs. And then like
Mhm.
coaches change that.
Man, I think, I've worked for other people a handful of times, and now like I just realized I was a bad employee. I'm just bad at working for other people. So which is why I'm in the private sector running my own thing. But I think that it kind of showed me a lot of that because a lot of that was happening to me when I was
Mhm.
being coached. I had a very long arm action, um, and I was trying to be forced almost like the pocket path being like super far inside here.
Yuck.
But my natural was like swinging like very far back.
Mhm.
So I had a lot of confusion there. But I think I don't even know what percentage we could put on there because I think the way like I don't even know if it starts with like trying to change mechanics as much as it starts with like chasing velocity. And I'm beating a dead horse so much on this one
Mhm.
because, I'll kind of bounce the question back to you after this, but like, I think that a lot of potential big leaguers have been ruined because the emphasis went from building a better body, building a better machine, having a high tolerance for volume, then increasing your high tolerance for intensity and stress. And it's like 12-year-olds are being preached the harder you throw, the more you're going to get seen. It's like when you're 12, nobody gives a shit about who you are. They don't care. And pitchability is one of the hardest things to teach, in my opinion. It's hard to
Mhm.
teach off speed. Wipe
Yep.
out off speed because I've got an athlete who he's going to Texas. He was in the draft. Um, he got rated second best curveball at the combine. That is hard to teach.
Yeah.
That is really hard to teach. And then you get kids who have like a 3 pitch mix, but they're told you got to throw harder. You got to throw harder. And it changes their movement patterns without the coach even telling them to like
Mhm.
change the way they throw. Then that screws them up and they might be trying to catch up on their mechanics for months to even years because the patterns have completely changed. And they might even have an injury setback where they can't work on their mechanics for a long period of time. It could
Yep.
be something as low as like tendonitis, and it can be all the way to like, full blown Tommy John surgery. But I think that's kind of where it is. I don't think I could put, a specific number on it, but I think it's a very high percentile. But,
Yeah.
I'd like to get your thoughts on how much of not changing the movement patterns intentionally, like saying you got to look like this, you got to look like that, versus you have to throw the speed or you won't make it.
Yeah. I think it's ruined a lot of guys too. Um, Simply because like you said, it's taking it away from, hey, building that engine to be able to do it to then trying to force something that you just don't have. And so it's like then the athlete's going to try and find ways to make it happen, and then they're going to start changing their own movements themselves, which can be good or bad because then you might not know, like they might discover something, right? And that's what I like athletes to do is I like them exploring and trying different things. So then it's been like, whoa, that was cool, that worked. But I think in the long run, then it becomes chasing that metric, right?
Yeah.
And then I think something you and I have briefly talked about even just off this podcast is like pitchers in high school especially are now becoming showcase pitchers rather than
Yeah.
being able to win games. And it's like, okay, let's chase spin rate, let's chase fastball velocity, let's chase curveball movement, slider movement. So they have all of these nasty pitches,
Mm-hmm.
but they're all swing and miss pitches that either start in the zone and end up out or that hitters don't want to swing at anyway. So you end up with all these walks. But man,
Mm-hmm.
they've got good trackman data.
Yeah. And that was another thing that I had heard before. And this hit home with me. Like when I heard this, I was like, wow, nobody cries during a showcase, but at the end of a high school season, 80% of the players on the field are crying because the season's over. They didn't make it. They got beat in the playoffs in a way that sucked.
Mhm.
Um, you don't see guys out there with camaraderie at that. So I think we're teaching people to be so individual, like such individuals
Mhm.
versus like having this collective reason to win. And like
Mhm.
winning breeds success, whether that's you know on the global level or on the personal level, because when you're in an environment where you're winning or where you're competing to win, and
Mhm.
your job, like let's say you're a starting pitcher in high school, is every seventh day you go out there and you try and get a win for your team, that's
Mhm.
only going to make you a better competitor. That's only going to make you a better pitcher. That's going to, teach you what you can do to get outs for other people to set them up for success versus in a showcase where it's about me, me, me. I get five batters to show, everyone what I have.
And
And
not all showcases even give you batters. That's the sad part.
yeah, yeah,
Like there are a
some of
lot of
it's,
showcases that are up here in Minnesota where it's like, all right, you got 15 to 20 pitches, show us all your stuff, and then we'll give you a call back type of thing. And it's like they're
yeah,
not even throwing to a hitter. And it's like, is that how much of an assessment of skill is that?
yeah. And I would also like to know like how many guys get passed up that way too, because even if you look at it from a hitting standpoint, let's say that you take hitter A, hitter B, they both have the same exit velocity,
Mhm.
or no, let's say they both have the same. They have the same batting average. They have the same batting average, and they have the same exit velocity as well. They both hit an average of 98 miles an hour off the bat, but one guy has a tendency to fly out versus the other guy has a tendency to line out.
Mhm.
But they both have the same batting average. They both have the same exit velocity, but they're taking one guy over the other when an out is an out, essentially. And I think they're doing the same thing to pitchers, where it's like a guy throws, 95 in high school, another pitcher throws 95 in high school. And you see it in the draft as well, where it's like they compare these two pitchers, they've got similar stuff, and they're talking about them like they're completely different guys. And if you put them next to each other, like they're getting the same results. It's just one of them has like maybe one metric that's a little bit different. The fastball spin is a little bit different vertically or horizontally or something. And showcases, well, they have their place. If I'm a college coach, personally, I want to see how they get people out. I want to
Yep.
see how like what are like how do you produce a result versus let me take this data, let's see what I can do with it, and then let's go through a really long process of trying to make this data get outs.
Yep.
Like if you can't, yeah, like if you can, like everyone's played with that guy who's got disgusting stuff but can't get an out.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's walks. A lot
Yep.
of times it's walks. And they're like, how is 95 getting hit? Well, because it's dick middle and they know it's coming because it's 3-1, it's 2-0
Yeah.
every time.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like guys, they want to throw all their nasty stuff early and then they end up way behind. And it's like, well, I have to serve something here. And it's like, like there's a guy that I know that calls it like you need a pitch that's swing atable is what he calls it. Like you need a pitch that's going to get a swing.
Yeah.
That doesn't
Mm-hmm.
mean you have to throw a bad pitch, but you need to throw something that actually looks enticing. Like if you've got, for example, a nasty sinker and sweeper and a changeup, and they all have tons of movement, like nobody wants to swing at that.
Yeah.
Like, I think something that's going on, at least on pitching Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, is like having that bridge pitch. So like having a cutter or something that like doesn't move as much. And I think that's a good start, but it's also like, what else can you throw that looks good enough to swing at to then set up your nasty stuff?
Mm-hmm.
Like all of that movement. Like if you're just throwing nothing but movement, and like I experienced this, especially in college, like I was one of those guys that had a lot of movement. Um, but I just wanted to throw harder because I didn't play at my junior college because they said I needed to throw harder. So I was one of those guys that was trying to do that. And I didn't, but like I still had the movement, but I didn't have anything that was like anybody wanted to swing at. So I ended
Yeah.
up walking a lot of people because I got behind, or then I'd give up a bases clearing double because I went 3-1 and I had to go fastball. So like
Yeah.
it's just one of those things where you need something that they can swing at.
Yeah, no, 100%. And it's kind of ruined that way because everyone sees the highlights too. I remember I had at my JUCO, we won a game, but it was kind of ugly.
Mm-hmm.
And the coach pulled us aside and he just goes, "You all suck. You suck because all you want to do is watch the highlight reels. You want the ESPN, MLB Network highlight reels, but you don't watch the shit that goes on before that. You don't get to see guys landing in there." And I think Adam Wainwright was talking about Scherzer leading in pitches right down the middle and just dominating right there
Mm-hmm.
too. Because, dude, like you play men's league still, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Do you still hit?
No, not I did when I was in Charlotte. Out here
Yeah.
in Minnesota, they call it town ball. Every
Hmm.
town has like a home team, and there's
Yeah.
no age limit.
Okay.
So I'm practically playing in a college summer league almost.
Oh,
So like we're
yeah.
facing some really good pitching. So I do
Yeah.
not touch a bat.
Yeah. Well, anyways, like, I mean, you've hit before.
Yeah.
How many times, and then like in a pitching, like from a pitching perspective, how many times have you thrown that pitch right there? Guy takes it, swings and misses, pops it up, grounds it out, and you're like, whew,
Yeah.
that was hittable.
Mhm.
Like,
Like all the
that, like,
time.
yeah, because there are 8 other guys back there who can grab the ball. They're positioned in a way that we've found is, the most optimal way to get outs. It's like, why dance
Yeah.
around the zone? That kind of goes back to like, you know, I know you're not trying to walk people, but you're definitely not trying to throw strikes here,
Yeah.
you know, and, but
Yeah, and I've experienced a little bit that year as well, like pitching, where it's like I'm trying to set up certain pitches, like I'm worried about the sequence, and like the first couple outings, it was like just missing lots of walks, things like that. And I was like, all right, I'm just gonna keep throwing everything just down the middle. And I actually strikeout count went up, less hits, less runs being scored,
yeah,
less walks, less hit by pitch. Like it's like, okay, yeah, let's just start down the middle and then we can expand if we need to. But it was just like, okay, like this is easier just throwing it down the middle for the first couple. So,
yeah. No, and I also think if you try and throw it down the middle, you're probably going to hit a corner, you know?
oh, yeah, most of the
Yeah,
time, especially with guys learning how to get a ton of movement, it's like, why would you try to start it anywhere else but the middle? It's not going to go there.
yeah, yeah. And if it does, it's like, whoop de doo, guy might be taking it, you
Yeah,
know?
like nobody's expecting it down the middle because like the hitter knows I'm not trying to place it perfectly for him. So
Mm.
I mean, I think Pitching Ninja has posted like, here's all the fastballs above 95 down the middle that haven't been swung at, and it's like just
Yeah,
so many of them.
yeah, yeah. And it's also just because like, and I think the videos that like Bauer's putting out right now are really cool, where he's talking about like all the tunneling and stuff. And obviously, he's probably one of the most advanced pitchers in all of baseball, where he can talk to himself and YouTube about
Yeah,
like tunneling and everything. But it's like he talks about setting up right down the middle and everything too. But I kind of want to shift almost, because I think this does play a little bit into an aspect of East Coast, West Coast baseball. And I know you wanted to touch on that a little bit. Now,
yeah,
you grew up on the West Coast.
yep,
I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in Chicago. So I had an extended off season. Being out here in California, I've seen these guys get no break.
yep,
It's summer ball, fall ball, winter ball, spring ball, repeat.
yep,
Some guys get a little bit of a time off, and then some guys are forced to because they have either an overuse or an underuse injury. Like I would say when guys get into February, March, if they're injured, they weren't prepared. That's an underuse injury. And then you get into like the summertime and fall ball, guys get beat up. It's like, yeah, that's overuse. They way too much load than they could handle. I think going off of that, like East Coast or like Midwest baseball, because you're in the Midwest now.
yep,
Um, these guys, it's snowing, it's raining, you can't get on a field. You have more time to work on those things versus a constant mindset of I got to get outs. I got to get outs. And if there's more good coaching, I think that, or even just no coaching, if we just stepped back and we're like, we just watched guys throw a pen.
Mhm.
Like when I listened to you when you were on In the Zone with Garrison, and you talked about how I think parents got angry with you because you didn't say much during a bullpen session or something.
Yeah.
And I took that approach where I just told the kid, I'm like, I'm just gonna watch. I'm just
Mhm.
gonna watch you today. Let's see how you move. Let's see. You don't have to say something every pitch. You know, they know they made a
No.
bad pitch. It's like curveball misses up high. I don't have to say, oh, it was a little up. Like, no, like they know they threw it up.
Yeah.
So it's like I think that in cold states, pitchers have the ability to take advantage of this time where they can learn to be like middle, then start to work corners and spend that time in the weight room because they're going to have more time for that versus trying to race from game to game. They're exhausted.
Mhm.
They can't get in the weight room, or they're burning so many calories because they're just going from game to game. You're all good.
Yeah. Sorry, that was
You're good.
um but
But what are your thoughts on that?
yeah, I think my thoughts are a little bit on the opposite of I think what you're getting at. Like
Interesting.
and the reason I say that is because yes, they do have that extended off season, right? And like they do have time to work on the actual skill, but when you're indoors, you can't get a catcher, you can't get the context that you want, which
Sure.
MASH, we did a really good job this past winter. We had catchers there almost every week. We started doing live ABs in January. Nobody, as far as I know, has done that in Minnesota. And we did keep track of pitch counts. Like the first time we did it, it was like, hey, you're going to get 5 pitches in a set. Every pitch is a full count pitch. Like that's how we're going to treat it. I was like, okay. Like you don't want to walk a guy, you got to throw first pitch strike, basically. And so we did 2 sets of that. So they got 10 pitches against a live batter. So we would scale it. Um, but when you can't get those things, what do you work on? Oh, well, we have a Rapsodo and a 9 pocket
Yeah.
and a radar gun. Let's try to see some cool numbers, right? And then that's what the offseason turns into. And then you
Yeah.
lose that skill. I actually like if like we had there's a kid in the 20 class of 2026, the number one ranked player in Minnesota is like 320 something in the nation.
Okay.
Like
Interesting.
top player in Minnesota doesn't even top the top 300. And I think the
Yeah.
reason is because these warmer states, especially West Coast, when you are playing games all year round, you find a way to win.
Hmm.
Like you're kind of
That's fair.
forced to, like, and so I think that the overall skill on the West Coast or in these warmer states is going to be better because they are playing more games. Do I think it's the right model? No. Like I think I did 10 to 12U like travel ball where it was like spring, summer, fall, and winter. And it was just like way too much, like we realized. And I don't think
Yeah.
I didn't play club ball after that or travel ball, whatever you want. Like I just didn't.
Mhm.
It was I played in the spring or middle school, it was a summer season. That was it.
Yeah.
Like that's just what we did. I played basketball and football, so I didn't have time to try and find travel teams. But I think you're going to end up with more skill because they are playing more games or they are in situations where it's like, not new to them. In Minnesota, like you get to October and it's snowing already. Like
Yeah.
you can't play, like you get a super short fall ball. And then if you play in the spring, you're getting snowed out then too. So
Yeah.
you really only get a summer season. So there's a lot less time to actually figure out like where what do we need to work on when it comes to in game. And I think it like we can produce some good metrics out here for sure because that's where we spend almost all of our time is indoors in a lab, if you want to call it that. So
Yeah.
it's like I think that Minnesota is going to produce more metrics, more like better data in
Hmm.
my opinion. I don't have the full experience to say that for sure, but I think it has the
Yeah.
potential to. As far as like California, those are going to be the better skilled, overall
Sure.
skilled pitchers or even players. But
Oh, yeah, I would agree with that. Do you think that it plays at all into, now, I don't know how you feel about how young, guys are specializing now. Um, but I noticed growing up in Chicago, tons of guys on my team played football. A
Mhm.
handful of basketball because it kind of ran into the beginning of baseball season. Um, but that specialization, I really bought into that. And, I think even like middle school or grade school. However, I kind of hated sports until, maybe I was in like middle school just because I
Mhm.
sucked. But like, I think the specialization, I always like saw all these guys who play all these different sports. They tended to be better. They knew their body more. They could explore better before a lot of this kind of like explorative training has come out. And, my high school coach, who I believe should be coaching at the collegiate level, he was like encouraging two-way athletes to the point where they were probably getting like tons of praise and reward for that kind of thing because it made them better baseball players. Do you think that the, warm and cold states have anything to do with specialization in sport at a young age?
I think it makes the warmer states make it easier to specialize in baseball because you have the ability to do it year round. I think Minnesota is starting to get that because of the rise in the indoor facilities. Um, but like we have so many hockey players and basketball players and wrestlers that train with us to where it's like they miss a handful of sessions because like, oh, I got a hockey game on Friday or Saturday, whatever it might be. I can't make it in. Right. So we actually get a lot of that. So I actually think we see the specialization happen younger, I guess, in Minnesota because it's like, well, not every 10-year-old is going to be playing hockey for, parents and safety reasons, which totally get like things like that. So, like, yeah, you will probably get more of the
Yeah.
younger kids that are in year round. Um, but there are just a ton of kids that are playing hockey, playing basketball, they're wrestling, like they're doing all these other things because in the winter out here, like you have to find something to do.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
I,
no, I agree with that. I think that's when you're in that winter time, because I think, private sector baseball with indoor facility was, I want to say, kind of on the rise when, certain facilities came up around, 2010, 2012. Um, so, it started in a cold state,
Mhm.
made its way through cold states because that's what they needed. When you're in California, Arizona, wherever, you don't necessarily need to have that indoor place because you
No,
can go play on a field all the time unless it's raining. Even
right.
then, they're not going to last that long.
Yeah. And
But
even when it's cold, like you can still play. Like it doesn't like
mm, yeah, no, 100%. And so to shift off them, kind of one of the last topics I want to hit on was you wanted to talk about like eco dynamics in sports. You
yeah.
said that really bugged you. So kind of expand on that a little bit.
Yeah,
And
for sure. So if anybody listening follows me on social media, like I truly do see sport and kind of the world through an ecological lens. But what has happened lately, and I found it especially in baseball, is there are a lot of coaches, and it's to no fault of their own. I'm not putting blame on anybody here, but they claim that what they're doing is ecologically ecological ecologically sound. I'm just going to use that term, right? That it fits, like it works with ecological dynamics because they're doing things a little bit differently. But in the reality, they don't quite understand the underpinning theory behind it, if that makes sense. Like saying that your eco D is like a buzzword now to like get people almost to like buy your product or buy into your program. And a lot of the stuff they do just Sean Mishka says it's not even logical with what they're doing. Like through an ecological lens, we understand that there is a relationship between the athlete or the performer, the task, and the environment.
yeah,
Right? It's intertwined. You cannot separate the three. And there's a lot more detail that goes into it. But then what they'll do and claim Eco D is they will literally focus only on the athlete and mechanics, but they're doing like some Franz Bosch type of stuff, right?
yeah,
Some of it can work, but when you spend an hour doing water bags trying to find the perfect hinge, how
yeah,
is that truly ecologically sound when you're still trying to get them to fit this perfect mold without even acknowledging the task or the environment,
Yeah.
right? It's just like total. It's like Tyler Yerby and Sean Miska call it pulling from the other side of the fence. Like you have like perfect mechanic side, and then you have a truly ecological side, and then you have on this perfect mechanic side, like, oh, I'm going to pull this term, take it over, and say, oh, now it's ecologically dynamic. Like it fits. When in reality, like you're no different than a lesson guru saying, oh, you need to have your arm at 90 degrees and your elbow needs to be perfectly even with your shoulder. It's like doesn't quite fit. It doesn't make sense at all. And it's like I feel like there are a lot of coaches out there that are trying, but maybe either whether they can't afford paying for education or they just don't
Mhm.
want to. I think they're missing out on a lot. Um, I think a lot of the stuff that I have learned is I've literally paid for it because it's like I
Yeah.
want to be a better coach. I want to be of better service. And it's like, well, you can't really do that just getting all of the free stuff because then you
Yeah.
miss out on so much more. Like I took it was the Movement Academy through Emergence. Like I did
Mhm.
that 6 month class. I actually, I did it with Garrison. Like he and I
Okay.
went through the same cohort, and it was like, was it a lot of money? Yes. But did I get so much more out of it and a deeper understanding of what ecological dynamics is? 100%. And I can actually look at movement and be like, okay, what is this movement telling me in relation to the task and the environment? Like
Sure.
I can
Yeah.
actually kind of see the whole picture now rather than it's just like, oh, let's perturb the system to try to find the ideal hinge. It's
Yeah.
like there was an athlete, I'm not going to name any names, but he worked with a very well-known coach, and he's gotten a lot of success. I'm not going to tear him down or anything like that, but it's another one that claims to be ecologically dynamic, like ecologically sound. And he was saying that, like, he goes, yeah, I just can't find my hinge. Like, well, I'm like, how long have you been working on it? And I wasn't working with this athlete, just a mutual connection. We started talking a little bit. He's like, I've been working on it for 3 months and I haven't been able to find it. And I'm like, you ever thought about rotating as fast as you can?
Yeah.
And he goes, no. I was like, okay, don't you think that if you're just trying to rotate as fast as you can, you're probably going to find some kind of a load? He goes, yeah, that made just so much sense. It's like, right. Like if I were to tell you, he was a pitcher, if I were to tell you to go hit a ball off a tee as hard as you can, are you going to think about the hinge or is it just going to happen? He goes, oh, it's probably just going to happen. And I usually have a better lower half when I do that anyway. I said, yeah, because you're not being drilled into
Yeah.
finding a specific one. You're kind of letting your body self organize in a way. And when we get to self
Yeah.
organization and it's still not functional, then we can start to look at physiological constraints. Is there something tight? Is there something weak? Like, what can we do to address that instead
Yeah.
of trying to force it? And usually it gets better results. Like, I've had guys where it's like, hey man, you're already really athletic. You throw a lot of strikes. You got good stuff. I'm going to be honest with you. And if you don't want me as a coach, let me know. You don't need to mess with anything with your mechanics. And
Hmm.
the ones that bought in with that have seen the most success when it comes to velocity when it wasn't the main focus. Like I had a kid that was a junior in high school, went from topping 83 to topping 91 in 9 months. So I was like, we just need to crush the weight room, continue to throw, but I don't want you worrying about what your body is doing. I want you to get outs. He was like,
Yeah.
okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
And
Makes sense.
it's just like, what can your body do naturally
Yeah.
without the corruption of overcoaching?
There's one thing I always show guys who are very concerned about, how low they can get into a hinge. And I'm just like, dude, look at Zach Gallen.
Yeah.
Like that guy's got like almost no depth. He just looks like he's straight up because everyone wants to be compared to Chapman, you know?
Yeah.
So it is a very interesting thing where it's like, I have had athletes where I'm like, not going to touch you. There's
Yeah.
nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with you. It's
Yeah.
yeah. And that's a crazy thing. And it's a lot of times athletes don't even want to hear that too, because they want to know what's wrong with them.
Yeah.
And they don't think it's gonna come from weight room getting bigger because they feel like they're not going to see results as quick. Because you got to be
Yeah.
upfront, like, hey, look, putting on weight takes time. Getting stronger can take time.
Hmm.
But velocity gains sometimes don't take that much time. So if you start seeing 1, 2, 3, 4 mile an hour jumps, it's like we got to back off the gas pedal.
Yep.
So that goes a lot hand in hand with kind of what we've been talking about. Well, it's been awesome having you as a guest, man. I'm gonna have you plug yourself, kind of let everyone know where they can find you on social media, where they can hit you up, everything like that.
Yeah, for sure. So first of all, appreciate you for having me on.
Or
My Instagram is TJP_training. That's going to be a lot more of what I'm doing training wise, and just kind of get a glimpse of what I do for myself, along with what some of my athletes are doing, some athlete highlights, things like that, learning new pitches. And then on Twitter, you can find me at TJ Pruett, Pruett 2310. I haven't really posted a ton on there lately. It's usually more educational, like threads, things like that. They can get pretty long. So if you don't read the whole thing, I'm not offended. But yeah, so Twitter's going to be more educational. Instagram is going to be more of just seeing what I do as a coach and as an athlete still myself.
awesome. Well, we'll look forward to having you on again, having a part two, and
For
having a
sure.
deeper dive into some of the stuff that we've talked about today. But until then, thank you for being on and stay fearless, guys.